Start the recording. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon. We're going to get started with the continuation of what we covered last week here, which is we started with the AI 102. We were talking about OpenAI. And with that, we were discussing the initial setup for OpenAI. And just to kind of recap what we discussed last week, one of the first things that you'll need to do when you're ready to use OpenAI or any of the AI services is you need to go in the Azure portal and you've got to go in and create your instance. We're going to be focusing on OpenAI here for the next few weeks, but whether it's OpenAI, computer vision, doc intelligence, any of these, you first need to create your instance, which is used for, that's your interface into the service. Every customer, has can create an instance or more than one instance if they like. And when they create those instances in there, each instance gives you one of those instances gives you a key and an endpoint, which are going to be very important when you're trying to connect to your service here. All right, so at this point from last week, we've gone in already and we've set this up. So we've got, and I created one called MI class. So this is my instance, and within that instance, I've got my key that I can use for connecting, and I also have my endpoint, which I use to connect with also. For most, and we're going to get more in the code aspect of this in the next few weeks. Now we're looking at looking at it from a GUI perspective, but regardless of what application you're using to interface with Azure AI, you will need at a minimum the endpoint, which is the connection in, and then one of the two keys, which are basically to validate, to almost like authenticate you to make sure you're allowed to submit a request. So, and that's kind of where we left off last week. And so this week, what we're going to do is we're going to take it the next step. So now that I've created my instance of OpenAI, in this case called MI class, now I need to go in and I need to kind of tweak it. I need to figure out what the best ways of doing things are. So we're going to go to the OpenAI portal, which is oai.azure.com. This is the OpenAI, we call it the OpenAI Studio, but it's the portal in which you use to create or test out the services that you're going to be using here, all the different configurations and so forth. So in this portal, let's start off, let's get familiar with the portal here itself. Number one, if this is the first time you're ever connecting to this portal, either you or someone in your organization, then you're going to get a pop-up box that's going to ask you, hey, what instance in your Azure environment do you want to connect to? What instance do you want to connect to? And that's important because we want to make sure that we go in and let me bring up a whiteboard here to kind of show you the workflow again. Let's see here. So what we're going to have here is we're going to have our Azure infrastructure. And within Azure, we're going to create our instance of OpenAI. So in this case, my instance is called MI class. And that's my instance of OpenAI. And the reason I do that is because that's going to give me an endpoint and two keys that I can use to connect to this service. Now, on the back end here, you're going to have a subscription. And your subscription is how you essentially pay for the services that you're consuming. So in this case, your AI services. And what's going to happen is you're going to build some type of application, whether it be a web app or whatever it is. You're going to have some type of application sitting over here, and you're going to have some type of interface. So maybe it's a regular user, and that regular user is going to connect to a web page, and maybe your application is a translation service, or maybe your application is a question and answer type service, or whatever it may be. So your user is going to submit a request to the application. The app then is going to use those keys. So it's going to have an endpoint, and it's going to have one of the keys configured in its code, and that's how it knows to send the request here. This then goes inside of the Microsoft infrastructure here. It then processes it and does whatever you want it to do, convert it, translate it, answer a question, whatever it may be. It's then going to respond back to your service, which in response is going to send it back to your application, which of course then sends it to your user. Now, all of that churning of data, we'll call it, that figuring out how to answer your question, providing an answer, that there's a cost associated with that. So at some point, what's going to happen is your instance is going to go back to your subscription and say, hey, they spent X amount of dollars, whatever currency you're using to provide this request. And then we on the back end will bill you for it. So that's kind of the ultimate process, the workflow that we have as part of this. So last week, we built this piece right here. Last week, we built the Azure side of it. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the OpenAI portal. So oai.azure.com. So we're going to go to the OpenAI portal, and we're going to play around with the settings. And the primary purpose of that is twofold. One, to set up the models that you want to use, but also to figure out all the little switches and settings you want to tweak it the way you want before you use it in your application. So today, we're going to focus on this piece right here. And again, I told you before, if you came for the drawings, you're in the wrong class because I'm a terrible drawer. So we're in the OpenAI portal here. And what will happen is if this is the first time you've come, it's going to ask you what instance you want to connect to. Now, in my environment, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different instances, which actually kind of mimics right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5 instances I have here. So that's where that comes from. There are reasons why you would create multiple instances of the service. For security, for management, for permissions, for cost, for budgeting. All those are good reasons why you would create multiple instances. But here's the one that we created from last week in my class. So I'm going to tell my AI portal, use that instance as I'm going around and clicking switches and doing different things in here. That is the one I'm going to use. Well, one of the first things that I'll need to do at this point is I need to create what's called a deployment. Now, a deployment, what it basically is it defines a AI model that we're going to use to process requests. Your models are here. So if you select the model option, you have all of these different models that you see listed in here. We're going to focus on basically the GPT models that we have in this week in our discussion. So these are all the pre-built models that we have. And if you want to create your own custom model because you have maybe unique data sets that you want to train AI on, then you can do that. You can create your own custom models if need be. But for now, we're going to use the generic models. So I need to create a deployment because right now what I want to do is I want to go over here and I want to use this chat feature. I want to show you how chat works. And the problem is I can't right now because it says I have no deployments. Tanji, yes, you have a question? I see your hand.
Yeah, this is a very simple question. I don't know if it's a silly one, but is the Azure Open Studio, is it almost like the App Store, Google Play Store for AI or not really?
No, not really. It's not because, the App Store, Google Play Store, there you go and download applications on your computers, phones, whatever. Though this is different. This is actually a web-based interface into your AI service. You're not downloading any applications or anything else here.
Okay, because I know like with the App Store, Google Play Store, as a developer, you can go ahead and add applications that you develop on there. So that's not this, right?
Yeah, that's definitely not this. No.
Okay, thank you.
I think once we go through here today, you'll have a little bit better understanding or a lot of better understanding of what we're going to do here. All right, so here's what's going to have to happen. My application is going to send data to the AI service. I need to, within my AI instance, define what model we're going to use to handle requests or to provide responses. So think of a model as the intelligence side of it. When I submit a request, how smart is the model going to be? And what kind of responses can it give? So let's walk through this, and I'm going to be putting some links in the chat window here as we go forward. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new model, because right now I can't do anything. I can't do any chatting, any completions, no Dolly, or any of those things. There's nothing that I can do right now. So we're going to create a model here. We're going to select the option to create a brand new deployment. And the first thing it asks is a name. The name is important because the name that you type in here or select here will be used in some cases in your application code. So let's call this MI class, and we'll call it GPT 3.5. So we'll use the GPT 3.5. Again, the name is cosmetic. It's whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to give it, in the real world, you would maybe tie to an application name or something like that. But I'm just going to call it MI class GPT 3.5. And then I pick the model that I want to use. And these models are the same models that you saw over here in the models listing, or at least some of them anyway. So here are the different models. So let's dive into models. Why is this important? So I'm going to pick the 3.5 Turbo one as the model. So we're going to go in here. I'm going to bring up the interwebs. And we're going to talk about, and I'm going to put this link in chat for those that want to save these links here. And this will identify the various models that we have available and what the differences are between the models. So if you're going to be preparing for the exam, then you definitely want to get a good understanding of the various models. So the models that we have here are the GPT models. We have embeddings, Dolly, Whisper, and text-to-speech. For this week, we're not going to focus on these. We're going to focus on these models here. Now, each of these models has certain capabilities. So the more current the model, the bigger, the better, the faster, the stronger, the more accurate it's going to be. Whereas the older models, the algorithms that were used, the learning that was used behind the scenes was, I mean, we're only talking, a year or so ago. So we're not talking like ancient times, but it's not as refined as it is now. So for GPT, Turbo basically means the model's going to respond very quickly. But in return for getting a faster response, you may lose a little bit of accuracy. Now, are you going to notice the accuracy? Like, is it going to be overwhelming? Like, if I were to ask, how many legs does a dog have? Is the Turbo model going to tell me 3? No. But if you start getting into very precise and very detailed requests, there is a difference between the Turbo and the non-Turbo models, in some cases anyway. So we have GPT-4, which is one of the models, and then GPT-4 Turbo is the faster version of that. We also have GPT 3.5. So 3.5 is the older version. So the bigger the number, the more current it is as of right now. That's the numbering convention that we use. So CP30, GPT 3.5 is an older model. And if you notice here, when I'm building my deployment, I said, let's go ahead and use the older model. I can use GPT-4 if I want to, but I'm going to pick 3.5 just for demo purposes. Now, in addition to that, let's move this over. So no way I can move. There we go. So let's talk about some of the differences between 3.5 and GPT-4 and so forth. What's really the difference? So we'll start with the older one, GPT 3.5. So with GPT 3.5, there's different versions of it. So within the major category, there are minor versions within there. So you have GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is that right there, 0125. This number will make sense. It's going to be important a little bit later. So I'll come back to that and I'll point it out again. But if we look at, let's say, GPT 3.5, the 0613 version, okay? It's an older model. So it performs, if you ask it, give me a listing of animals with 4 legs, it's going to give you that. But if you want to get more precise, more detailed, more complicated things, it may not give you as clean of a response as the newer models. Here's the other difference between this model and other models. Notice here this request token column, 4,096. What this means is there is a limit on the size of the request that I can put into the model. Let me give you an example. And I'm going to use very generic terms here. This is not going to be technically accurate, but I'm going to use this just to help you understand a little bit better. And I'll get into the weeds of it a little bit later here. Let's say a request token is a character or a word. Let's say a request token is a word. That means with 4,096, my request, when I enter information into the model, can be up to 4,096 words long. Again, it's not words, but we're using that example, which may seem like a lot, but there may be instances where you need more. So you may want a newer model like this one here, which gives you a larger request token size of 16,000 words. Again, it's not words, but we're going to use words in our example here. So that's one of the differences between all of the models is the input, and notice here you got some output stuff here, which we'll talk about, but the size of the request that you can submit. The other difference between the models is the information that the model has used to learn. Last week, someone asked a question about, when is the data, how accurate is the data, or how new is the data in the models? Well, the older models, notice here, GPT 3.5 is 2021. So if I were to use the 3.5 model and I asked AI, who won the Super Bowl this past February, which is 2024, the model would come back and tell me in so many words, I'm sorry, I can't predict the future. Because as far as this model is concerned, 2021 is the current year. So that's so the question we had last week, and I said, hold off, we'll talk about it. There it is. Each model, or some of the models, will vary based on the amount of data it samples. We call it training data. So that's the 3.5. And as you can see here, as we start going up in here, up in the 3.5 listing, we go from older to newer. As we get into the newer ones, the amount of data, by the way, input means the request I can put in. The output is the size of the response from the model. So I can put in more of a question or more of a statement, and it can respond to me. I can be more wordy in my request. If you look at the GPT-4 models, the first thing I want you to point out, and again, this is one of the oldest versions right here, but if we move up this list here to some of the newer ones, you'll notice here that the sampling data, the newer ones, we're going all the way up to October 2023 for the data. So can it still tell me who won the Super Bowl this year? No, but it can tell me who won the Super Bowl last year because that falls within that 2023 category. So that's one big difference. The other difference when it comes to GPT-4 is as we've evolved in our versions of GPT-4, notice the input size, how wordy your request can be inside of the AI model. You can have a lot more text in your request, and the output, the response for it, can be a lot larger also. So this is an example of why you may have multiple instances of AI running, because for some, you may want the ability to put in a lot more wordy requests, and for other ones, you may not. Any questions on this? Any questions? Make sense? Everybody good? So that's one of the biggest differences between the models. So when I go in here and I select GPT 3.4, now you have a better understanding. I'm asking it for something that's back in time, that's 3-4 years old at this point in time. And then here's that model version. So notice here 6013. If I go back to my GPT 3.5, I'm using this one right here, 6013. This is the version of the model that I'm using. So I can put in 4,096 tokens in my request. Again, it's not words, but we're going to say words for now. And it can give me answers up until 2021 of September. Or I can change it to one of the others. So each one of these, like 1106 is this one right here. which I can have a bigger input. Output's still going to be the same, but a bigger input as part of that there. So that's where the version comes into play. Now you'll notice here, when I selected the model, it automatically picked 6013 because that's the most current stable version. Let's call it stable version at this point. But there's another one, 1106, which is later and greater. Once you've built your models, you can always upgrade the model. So if I select 3.5 and I pick 6013, later on I can change this. I can say, let's use, a week from now, I can say, let's bump it up to 1106. But that requires me to go in and remember to select that, to go in next week or next month and change it. A better option would be select auto update to default, which it's not doing right now. But if I select auto update to default, what will happen is whatever the latest default model version is, the system will automatically update it for me. So those are the options that I have. Everybody good? Any questions? All right, so and what we'll do here is we'll change this. So now that you have an idea of the model types, let's go. And by the way, a lot of times when it says like GPT for 32K, that 32K, let's go into GPT-4. 32K is in here somewhere, right here. That 32K is normally, if there's like a number behind a big number, it's the maximum request size. The maximum tokens that you can put in there. Now, this one doesn't have 32K or, it doesn't say 128 because you have that. But when you see those that say that those numbers, that's what that means. All right. Now, you'll notice here when I change it to GPT-4, let's go GPT, which one did I just have there? 32K. I get an error here. No quota available. The selected version or deployment type or free up the resource or other deployments by requesting a quota increase and so forth. Not every Azure region is the same when it comes to this. Umer, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. So can you look at this model, like how you're, explaining the model type and the characters, how much you can take as how we do other resources in Azure, like different computes we pick, like, if you go for a more intense memory compute, and would it be in that type of category when you're selecting model types? Is it bigger compute?
It's not necessarily more compute. It's more about how recent the information is. Remember, 2021 versus 2023. It's also going to vary based on how big my request can be. So let me give you an example. Let's pull up Copilot. So most of you have probably seen or used Copilot before. And if I go to my Copilot for work, notice here down here, I can put my prompt, okay? So I can put my request down here. You see this little number down here, 2000? What that means is the maximum size of my request, meaning the amount of text that I can put in there. Whatever my request is, cannot be more than 2,000 tokens, request tokens. Again, it's not words, but let's say it's words for simplicity's sake. So the different models have those limits on the maximum size, not only of the request going in, but also in some cases, the size of the output coming out. And that's what we're controlling here. It doesn't really necessarily deal with, so it doesn't deal with compute, but it does. Here's why. Because behind the scenes, if you were to peel away all the layers of all this technology, there's computers or some type of thing with the CPU running. And what we at Microsoft have to determine, or what we had to figure out is, okay, how do we build customers for using AI? And we said, okay, the best way to do it was based on the request going in. We call it the request token, essentially. The request going in and the size of the response coming out and some additional parameters, which we'll talk about. So that's how we bill you. We can't really bill you for individual compute because you're not using a dedicated VM underneath the hood. It's a massive infrastructure of shared services. So that's how we have to figure out one way how to bill you. We got to figure out a way to monetize this, if you will. All right, so let's go back here. And by the way, sometimes like this pink box here, this error, a lot of times you maybe don't have enough resources in that region. And the reason for that, let's go back to our AI models and let's go to what's called quotas and limits. Same link I put in chat, just a different location here. So there are limits to what you can do. Notice here, let's go in. So for image generation, there's a limit for how many concurrent requests. DALL-E's like creating pictures, create a picture of a dinosaur on the beach. That's what DALL-E is, creating pictures and things like that. But there are limits on how many concurrent requests you can have and so forth as part of this. But here's what I want to show you. Each Azure region. Normally, in most cases, the ECUS would have everything. Usually if you look at Microsoft's cloud technologies, the ECUS will have more than any other region out there. But when it comes to AI, notice here, our quota limits, ECUS, I cannot do GPT-4 in the ECUS region. I can't do GPT-4 32K because I don't have any limits or quota capabilities for that, and so forth. And then we have all of these other components. So what's going to happen is this is going to tie back to a lot of times these errors that you get when you try to go with other technologies or when you try to go with other types. So you just got to kind of look at the chart here and kind of figure out what's what. Notice here, Sweden. You can do a lot of things in Sweden here. But the limits are the size of the amount of tokens per for your request overall. Now, once you hit your limit, you'll get basically you'll get a 431 error, and then you wait a minute, and then your limit resets. It resets every minute, and then you can start over again. So that's the limitation that you have. So let's go ahead and change this to GPT-3.5 Turbo, and we're going to create. So it's creating my deployment. So now if I go in here and go to my deployments, there it is right there. So I've got my first deployment. Now, let's go back to our application for a second. And we'll dig more into this either next week or the following week. But in my application code, I would need to put the endpoint for my OpenAI instance. I would need to put in one of the keys and the deployment name. I've got to include this. Because the way it kind of looks is this. You have your OpenAI. So let's see, our OAI. So we got our OpenAI instance. And I'm going to have deployment 1, deployment 2, deployment 3, deployment 4. I may have multiple deployments. The endpoint. So when my application connects to the AI service, I'm going to have an endpoint, which is a URL that points to my OpenAI instance. I'm going to have a key, one of my 2 keys, which basically allows the application to talk to my OpenAI instance. Right now, the OpenAI instance I have is right here. It's called MI class. You see it right there, MI class, and it's in the West US region here on the top right corner. But when my app connects to this OpenAI instance, I can have a deployment here. I can have another one here, another one here. I can have multiple deployments, and each deployment can use the same, I could have another 3.5 model here. I can have one that's using GPT-4 here for this model. So when my application connects, it needs to know which of these deployments to use. And so in your code, you've got to put this name, which we'll talk again. I'll demonstrate this when we get into coding again next week or the week after, but that's why that name is important. So now I'm ready to go because now I've got this piece, well, not necessarily that. I've got my model, my deployment model configured over here. So let's open it up. When I go to chat, again, this is my playground. This is where why didn't it pop up there? Okay, we're having some fun here. Oh, it's still working in the background here. But essentially what should happen is when I go to my chat page, I shouldn't get this new deployments found. It'll give me a window. And let me demonstrate. I'm going to switch over to another one of my environments, and I'll demonstrate what this would look like. So when I go into so here's my deployment. So for this one, I've got two deployments, one called Melinda Work and one called AI 102 Demo. When I go into chat here, this is what I should see once I have at least one deployment. Here is where you play around. That's why we call it a playground. Here's where you test out the different settings to find the sweet spot for the settings. And that's what we're going to focus on now for the next half an hour of this session. And whatever we don't finish now, we'll continue on in next week. So the first thing I'm going to point out is, and again, the order of, so we've got three different sections. Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3. So there are three different sections on this page that are important. I'm going to move this out of the way. So let's talk about the middle section. The middle section is where you test. So let me give you an example here. Who won the FIFA World Cup in, we'll say 1990, I think it's 1999 is when we had it. Luckily, AI can spell because I can't. So notice here. Oh, there was none. So let's try this again here. When would it have been? 2001. We have any soccer fans here? Let's do 2001 maybe. Oh no, it wasn't. Try this again. It's every, what, 4 years? Oh, you know why I'm getting the error? Because of my deployment model. Actually, oh, here it is right here. 2003, the closest event was won by France. Oh, 2000, let's do it to 2006. So let's go ahead and clear all of this. Who won the FIFA World Cup in 2006? And notice my atrocious typing, but AI doesn't matter. Also, tell me who the player of the match was. Here we go. All right, so there we go. So in this case, the FIFA World Cup in 2006 was won by Italy. The player of the match for the final game was Marco and his last Italian name there, Materazzi. Materazzi, I guess. So what I've just done, so let's look at our picture. So here's what I did. I connected to the OpenAI portal and I typed in a question. I said, who won the World Cup? I put in a request. The request then went here, went through the AI infrastructure for Microsoft. Microsoft came back with a response and then provided that response to my portal, which I see. And it came back and told me that Italy won the request and so forth. Oh, it's even number of years. Okay, thank you, Uber. And I love soccer. You'd think I'd know that, but anyway. So there you go. So that's what happened. Now, this request just cost me some money. And by the way, when I say money, it's not a lot of money. We're talking fractions of a penny, of cent for these requests. But if you're curious to know how pricing is done, you can go to the pricing page. And we break down the cost for doing these requests. Right now, so let's say I'm using the GPT-3.5 model for my request. First of all, I can have the maximum request size of 16K. Notice here, the maximum input. So for every 1,000 tokens in my request, it's going to cost me this much money. So what is that? 1,000th of a cent, or 5,000ths of a cent, or 10,000, 100,000, whatever it is. It's nothing. So I get charged for asking the question, who won the World Cup? But guess what? The system came back and told me it was Italy, and it gave me the player of the match. That is a response. That is an output. So I'm also charged for the response size. And this is a per 1,000 tokens. It costs me this. So with that being said, let's talk about what tokens really are. A token is not one word. A token, oh, no, I don't need any help with chat. A token is roughly 3 to 5 characters equals a token. So if I were to submit a request, let's go back in here and I'll show you how to figure this out. In my request right here, well, let's just say the word who is a token. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's say in 2006 is 1 token. So that's 7, 8. Let's say those two are together, 9, 10. Player is going to be 11, 12, 13, 14. So let's say hypothetically it's 14 tokens. That's how it's broken down. It's not based on an individual word. So that's how the pricing works. So when we go in here and look at this, for every request, it's broken down into tokens. Again, it's not, we like to say it's a word just to make it clean and easy, but it's not technically. So we're going to charge you for the request coming in. We're going to charge you for the response coming out. So that's how billing is done. So if you go down here to GPT-4, GPT-4 is bigger, better, faster, stronger. So because of that, the price, because it's still newer and more accurate, the price is a little bit more expensive to do that. But you're going to get a better response using that model. Plus, if you want to do like translation services and stuff, it's going to be a lot better. If you want to translate from one language to another, you can do that. To give you an example, so notice here, I can do translation services. Translate from English to French, French to English, or whatever other language that you want, but you can perform that function. So maybe you have an app that you allow users to input data or request in, and it'll translate it for them to a different language. So in this case here, again, we've got, so the word translate's a little bit bigger. So translate may be actually 2 tokens. Maybe 1 token here, 1, 2, and then part of the word French is 1 token. So this is 1 token here. Then maybe the remaining part of French is another token, hello, and so forth. And I'll show you how to actually see the exact token count here in a little bit. So this is your playground where you can kind of get an idea. Now, let's take a look at the left side here. So the middle is where you do your testing, basically. And by the way, I say middle now, but you can move these, or you can move one to the other side and so forth. You can rearrange these if you want to. Now, in this scenario, so I'm going to keep this right here. I'm going to clear my palette here, my playground area, and let's focus on the left side here. The left side defines how the output will come to us, what it's going to sound like, what it's going to look like. So we have a bunch of different templates that you can use. So let me give you an example here. So let's go back to who won the, and let me fix this because it's going to, I'm sure it's driving someone crazy. It's driving me crazy. So who won the FIFA World Cup and who was the player match? What was the score? And list all, provide, what's the word? Not highlights. So I can go in here and I can say, okay, tell me who the player of the match was, give me the score, tell me who won, and some highlights for the match. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So here we go. So 2006, won by Italy, is the player of the match. Some of the highlights, and it gives me some highlight information. Notice the tone of the response. It's very, I'll say boring, very, not really robotic, but very boring. There's no excitement to it or anything else. Over on the left here, you can change that. So watch this. I'm going to change this to a Shakespearean writing assistant. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear this. And let's rerun the question again and watch the response. All right, so actually that didn't take for some reason. Did I not save it? I thought I saved it. Maybe I didn't. Oh, let me clear my palette here. Let me refresh. I don't think I saved it here. All right, so let's go ahead and put that request back in here. And it didn't do it again here for me. Very, very interesting. It did give me a different output. So if you notice, the output's a little bit different. But what it should have done is given it to me in the form of like Shakespearean terms. And for some reason, it is not doing that. So let's go ahead and change this. Let's clear this. And let's try this one more time. If not, I'll figure it out and we'll play around with it next week. But what it should do is it should give me like words like thee and thou and very Shakespearean type responses for this. And for some reason, let me log out and log back in here. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. I've made so many changes in here lately. Let's go to the OpenAI portal. We're going to log in with a different account here. By the way, this is that pop-up. I mentioned that you get a pop-up box the first time you deploy. So that's what that pop-up box looks like there. There we go. Okay, so let's go back in here now. Let's go ahead and sign in. Oh, multi-factor authentication, MFA, gets you every time, doesn't it? Hang on to me. All right, so there we go. We're going to go back to, we'll use this one here. Let's go back to our playground. And let's change it to Shakespeare. Oops, did I? Okay, it changed a little bit, but it's still not saving it as much as I want. But what it should do is give me like these and thous and so forth that we get a response for. And I'll figure it out here why it's not working for me. And that's the thrill of live training. That sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't here. But that's what that is. It allows you to change the tone of the response. By the way, I can also do it here. Respond as a 19-year-old California hippie. So, if you're a California hippie, no offense. So I can put it in the prompt itself. Oh, whoa. Oh, so now it's working. For some reason, now the chat box, it did do the IRS one. So here you go. This is what it should look like. So yo, dude, like 2000, blah, 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 is gnarly, man. So you kind of get that surfer type vibe in the response. So on the left, you can change how it's going to respond to you. I made a statement last week toward the end. I said that, if I were a vacation planning company, what I would want is I would want people to go in, and when they ask for vacation information, I want the AI to respond in a very happy tone. Why? Because very few people ever are unhappy when they're planning a vacation. They're always excited and happy. So if I'm running a company that deals with helping people plan, I want to be as exciting as I want to be as happy as they are. So I can go in here and Here's another example. So instead of you using one of the templates, I can put it in here. So respond as if you're a person from the 1800s in England. Okay. So now I'm going to apply the changes. There we go. Now it's working. I apply the changes. So I've just told the system, this is called a system message. No matter what somebody puts in here, respond. So I'm going to erase the California part. I'm just going to put the question or the request in here and submit it. So notice here, I'm sorry, but I'm not able to answer your question as a person 1800s in England. However, okay, so a terrible example here. Again, my typing is atrocious, but we're going to work with this here. So let's clear our plate. By the way, you want to clear your palette when you're doing this, your environment, and then let's run it again. There you go. So this is what should have happened here. For some reason, the template's not taking right now. But notice I put it directly in here. Respond as and I typed everything wrong, as a Shakespeare writing assistant. Notice the response. Here's my question. There's my response. Other ways that you can use this. I can force a certain tone in the response, but I can also say, you are an HR assistant. Answer questions related to all HR topics. Do not answer questions about pay or, I don't know, vacation time. If someone asks about pay, please tell them to contact HR at 888-888-8888 or hr@company.com. All right. So, and my typing is atrocious. So I just went in there and I did that. So now let's do this. I'm going to ask a question to the AI model. Where can I find where can I find the company policy on clothing? I spelled policy wrong. So here you go. You can find the company policy on clothing from the employee handbook or by contacting the HR department. So you notice it responded as HR. Now watch this. Can you tell me how much Susie makes each year? So notice here, because in my prompt I said answer HR related questions unless it had to do with, pay or vacation time. And if somebody does ask about those, tell them to contact HR. So notice here, I'm sorry, your HR assistant. As an HR assistant, I do not have access to employee salary information. It is also confidential. So if you have any questions about your own salary or compensation, please contact HR at that. So you can use this to help you better shape the outcome of your message. Any questions on this?
So if you were to put Susie's in the system message, Susie makes 200K a year, it would answer back, or would it still say?
It would if I remove the do not answer questions about payroll and vacation time in there. Yes, okay. You can do that.
Okay.
So in the real world, as an organization, you could create an AI chat program application, web interface, where users can go in and ask for maybe vacation request forms, the policy on dress, a new device request form, like a new phone, or they can ask HR various questions and they will get a response back. But you can also define in the prompt, we call this a system message prompt. You can also define in here, answer anything except for these things. I can also do this. Also translate So no, watch this. Provide the response in English and Spanish. Let's save this. Let's go ahead and put this in here now. Let's clear our palette and watch what happens now. So notice here, it gave me the same English version about I can't do it for you, but then it also gave me a Spanish version of it. So in your system message, you can define parameters on how the model will respond. Any questions on that? Below that, we have what's called using examples. And if I use one of the templates, let's say the Shakespeare writing one. So notice here, here's the prompt for the Shakespeare writing one. The template just has a pre-built prompt for you. But further down here, there's an example. So what this does is it further helps the AI model respond more specific or better. Not only did I tell it to respond as if it were Shakespeare, but then I gave it an example of a user asking a question and then the type of response they should get. We call this first shot. And we'll talk about that more next week. So I can provide multiple examples of questions and multiple examples of responses along with the message itself saying how you should respond. And all that does is it trains the model to respond even more refined. Everybody good? Any questions on that? Or any questions in general? And we give you some pre-built templates, but you can manually type in whatever you want here. Bill, did you have a question?
Yes. I would like to know if you can use other models. So far in the list, I've been seeing ChatGPT models that belong to ChatGPT. But if you want to use Copilot or Gemini, is that possible?
Copilot is going to be through a generic web portal through your browser, so you can use that if you want to. But you can also, so down here where it says models, you can create your own custom model. So if you want to use other models, you do have the ability to create those models and then train them based on what you want. So you don't have to use any of the predefined ones. You can build your own if you want to.
Okay.
It takes it does require some development, but you can do it.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
All right, no problem. All right, so now you have an example of the setup side. This is part of the prompt. Now, let's talk a little bit about pricing here for a second. So I'm going to clear everything out. So I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to clear this out. We're going to start from scratch. Now, I told you that all pricing is done based on token use. There is a pricing for tokens for the request, and there's pricing for the response. Watch this. Tell me about Harry Potter. So tell me about Harry Potter. When I submit this request, I'm going to show you exactly how many tokens, but let's say that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's say a total of 6 tokens when you add up all the characters. How many tokens it technically uses is over here on the right. So if you hover over this, you'll see user query, and you see user query says 7. So tell me about Harry Potter is actually 7 tokens. So when I submit this request, it's going to cost me 7 tokens. So let's go ahead and submit it. So the request cost me 7 tokens, and then it cost me whatever this token count is here for the response, which is what we have here. That is your message history. So it submitted a request. I got a price back. Now I got a response back, and it cost me X amount of tokens, X amount of dollars. Okay. Now, watch this. Who are the characters? Now, I want to show you something here. My first question was, tell me about Harry Potter. And it told me about Harry Potter. My next question was, who are the it should have been characters, but who are the characters? And it came back and told me the character, and I've never seen Harry Potter or watched it, but read it, but I guess these are sounds like the characters of the books and the movies. So it responded and gave me the characters. Now notice over here my total token breakdown. 462 is my message history. Here's how this works. OpenAI is like me and my wife, okay? And if you're married, you can probably relate to this. I forget everything. When my wife brings up something, do you remember what I talked about last week? I'm like, no, I don't, okay? OpenAI is the same way. OpenAI has amnesia. When I asked OpenAI to tell me about Harry Potter, it went out and found information about Harry Potter. When I went back and said, okay, now tell me about the characters. Who are the characters? OpenAI doesn't know what I'm talking about. Why? Because it can't remember that we're talking about Harry Potter. Every request is a separate request. So how do we fix that problem to maintain a session? So I can have an entire conversation with AI and it knows what I'm talking about. So when I said, who are the characters? How does it know that I'm talking about Harry Potter characters? That is what's referred to as your message history, that 462. So here's what AI did. And I'm going to walk you through this. Number one, I asked a question. Number two, it gave me a response. Number three, I asked a follow-up question. But when I asked that follow-up question, the system sent this question, but it also sent this, the part of our conversation. So what I'm doing here is I'm reminding the system what we're talking about, and then I'm asking another question. And it came back and told me about those. So now let's do this. Let me clear this, and let's do this again. So who won the World Cup in 2006? We came back with Italy. So now I'm going to say, let's say, what's a non-World Cup related question here? So who won the World Cup? That, okay. So how many points were scored in field goals? Notice here I asked it something completely unrelated to right now. So here's what happened. I asked it who won the World Cup. It came back and told me Italy did. I then asked another question, how many points were scored in field goals? So what AI did, or what my request happened, it sent my request, but it also sent this piece right here. AI came back and said, wait a second, there are no field goals in soccer, in football, in America, in soccer. So that's the error I got. Now, if I were to say who won the Super Bowl in 2001, New England Patriots, how many points were scored on field goals? And it'll tell me. You know what? Because of it had, I'm sorry, but I cannot provide a specific answer to your question without knowing which Super Bowl game you're referring to. So actually it says, please give me more details. It should have pulled this, but for some reason it didn't here as part of that. But every time you submit a request and a follow-up question and a follow-up question to that, it's sending your follow-up question and everything else that happened in that conversation because AI doesn't know what we're talking about. So when you're setting this up, you got to be careful because every time you submit a follow-up question, you're going to get charged for the token for that question and the tokens for all the reminder, everything about that that we were talking about. So it sends everything. So those tokens can add up. Another thing, so I've got everything cleared, so there's no tokens right now. Let's say I change this back to Shakespeare, okay? Notice over here now, system message is 117 questions, or I'm sorry, 117 tokens, which means if I were to say, who won the World Cup in 2026, and they came back and told me Italy, I got charged for their question, the response, and what was sent here. All of this is sent to AI every time I ask a question. Because one, I ask the question, I also tell AI how to respond to me, and then it provides a response. So all of that was included in my total tokens. So the system message was 117, and then that few shot, you see where it says few shot examples there of 34? That is this piece right here. Now, let's say I don't want to do that. I can remove my few shots, so get rid of that. So what's going to happen is, notice my few shot examples went down to 0 now, because I'm not sending that along with every question. Any questions on this? Everybody good? What do you think? I'll stop the recording here. What do you guys think of this? Starting to make a little bit more sense? Little, you're starting to see where all of this is, all the different moving parts that we have that are part of that.